Let's start with our next chapter, managing a virtual machine. In this video, we will talk about disks in Azure VM, attaching a disk to a VM, encryption options in Azure with disks, and custom extension scripts. So first, let's understand the types of disks we have in Azure VM. So basically we have two types of disks in Azure VM. One is called operating system disk and another is data disk. So what's the difference between the two? The operating system disk is the one where your operating system is installed. Apart from this OS disk, you can also attach a data disk to your Azure VM and mount a volume using that. Apart from these two data disks, you have a temporary disk attached to your Azure VM when you first deploy it. This temporary disk has a very small amount of data that depends upon what kind of Azure VM you have created, like what kind of OS disk you have opted for. Based on that, you will get a size of your temporary disk. So in temporary disk, the data is not stored permanently. So if you restart your VM, the data will still there, it will remain intact. However, if you turn off the machine, like if you go to the Azure portal and you shut it down, then the machine itself gets deallocated from the physical server in the Azure data center, and all the data from the temporary disk gets erased. Let's see all that in action, that how we can attach a data disk to an Azure VM. Here am I on my Azure VM. I have two disks here. One is the operating system disk and another one is the temporary storage that I was talking about. Let's go ahead and attach another data disk to this Azure VM. So I'll go to my Azure portal. This is the machine I am logged into. And on this I will go to disks. Right now I have an OS disk. It is the name of the disk and I can see all the configuration. It's a standard HDD and 127 of gigs, the IOPS and everything I can see about that OS disk. Under data disks, I can attach another disk to it. Let's go ahead and do that. I can give it a name. Let's say lab01 data disk 1. I don't want a premium SSD. Okay, I can go ahead with standard HDD, which will give low performance, but it's a test environment, so why not? Okay, I'm good with it. Let's apply. Alright, so it has been successfully added. Let's go back to our Azure VM and let's try to mount this data disk. So now I will go to the disk management option under computer management. You can also directly go to that using a run command, but let me show you step-by-step process. So under computer management, I can go to disk management and here I will see all my disks for that virtual machine. So it's automatically telling me to initialize a disk before a logical disk manager can access it. So let me just initialize this. So click on OK. Alright, so I have a disk 0, which is the basic one, and it has my Windows operating system. Okay, so this is the disk 2 which we had attached from the Azure portal. So let me right click on it and click on new simple volume. Okay, let's click on next. Yeah, I want all of it. The simple volume size is in MB. I want the same as the maximum disk space in MB. click on next. I'm okay with E. Okay, why not give it letter A? Let's just verify the drive letter on gate C and D. So let's just go with A. Let's click on next. I want NTFS. Give it a name. Let's say data disk. Okay, perform a quick format. And here I can see all the settings I have selected. Let's click on finish. Alrighty, now I do see the data disk that I attached. Let's verify this using the file explorer. I go to this PC and here I see my data disk. Okay, so sounds looks okay. Let's move ahead with our next topic. Now let's talk about managed disk encryption options. In Azure, we have Azure Disk Storage Server-Side Encryption. In this, we have Azure Storage Encryption, also known as encryption at rest. So this automatically encrypts your OS disk and the data disk. So let's say that when you're creating a new VM, this option will be there automatically, but in this option you will get two more options, like how you want to encrypt your data. The first option is platform managed key. We talked about this in the previous video. So in short, the platform managed key is being managed by Microsoft Azure, and the second option you get is customer managed key, where customer himself needs to create the key and manage it. The second one is encryption at host. The benefit of encryption at host is that it encrypts your temporary storage as well. So because Azure storage encryption is for managed disk encryption, but the temporary storage is not a managed disk, therefore Azure storage encryption cannot encrypt the temporary storage, but encryption at host can. The another thing is that with encryption at host, the encryption is being done by the underlying hardware, by the physical server that your machine is running on. However, in Azure storage option, everything is taken care by the Azure storage. The next option is Azure disk encryption. So with Azure disk encryption, you need to have a key vault, which the Azure disk encryption service will access. And the thing is that it is built into the Azure disk encryption is built into the key vault. You just need to have the permission to access it, and it is just like in your Windows you access encrypt your data using BitLocker. Azure disk encryption uses the same thing. So with ADE, like I told before, it is integrated in Azure Key Vault. You can also add the key encryption key along with the Azure Key Vault, which is just like another layer of security. So you can say that there are two layers of securities and it's much more secure, but it's anyway optional. It's up to you. With Azure disk encryption, the encryption and decryption, it happens at the OS level. So whenever your operating system is trying to interact with your data, the encryption and decryption, those actions will happen. Platform managed key and customer managed key, I think I have already explained that the platform managed key is being managed by Microsoft. The key and everything, it's just Microsoft headache, they will take care of it. With customer managed key, you need to create and manage the encryption. Okay, now with customer managed key, basically there are two ingredients. The one is the Azure Key Vault. So you will use the Azure Key Vault to create the encryption keys. The second ingredient is disk encryption sets. So for now, just understand that whenever the disk wants to access the key vault, it will access it using disk encryption sets. So disk encryption sets will kind of store the keys for you, and using disk encryption sets, the managed disk will access the key vault for encryption and decryption. Let's understand the this workflow of customer managed key with server side encryption. So let's suppose that we already have a key vault in place. Now the administrator will create the disk encryption set. When the disk encryption set is created or is being created, the administrator will also have to create a user managed identity that will be stored in Azure Active Directory. Now it's known as Entra ID. So when it is created, the managed disk will contact the Active Directory and it is asked for authentication and authorization. Managed disk will actually use the user assigned identity to the disk encryption set, which is stored in Active Directory. Okay, so managed disk is using that identity for authentication and authorization. So when the authorization is done in a way that this identity of disk encryption set has those permissions like get, wrap and unwrap of key, and it is successful, then the managed disk can go ahead, because it will get the token. So managed disk can go ahead and contact the Azure Key Vault and perform those operations like wrap and unwrap and get the key and everything. So this is a high level overview of how the server side encryption with the customer managed key works. Now let's see everything in action. Let's start by creating a key vault. So my subscription, let's say free trial, I will use the RG3 resource group. I will enter a key vault name, let's say Azure storage encryption. Now important thing, when you create a key vault and a disk encryption set, both of these can be in different resource group, but they need to be in same region. So I will select my region, Central India. Now I will make sure when I create the disk encryption set, that goes to Central India as well. Here is another important thing. In order to be able to use customer managed key, we need to enable this purge protection. If you keep it to disabled, it won't work. So the encryption will fail. Let's click on next. Now I want a access policy because I need to use the managed identity. So user managed identity that will be create in the during disk encryption sets. So we will use that. All right, now let me see if I can check the permissions. Now my account does have, or for that matter any account that will be creating the VM and encrypting it, need to have this encrypt decrypt. So I'll just say select all and next and save. Okay, everything looks good. Let's create this. Alright, so it has been created. Let's go to the resource. I'll go to keys because I need a key for the encryption. I will click on generate RSA. I'll say RSA size 4096. I'll also give it a name. So let's say my VM key. Okay, it is enabled. Yes, let's click on create. Okay, so my all right, a correction here. If I go to access policies, my account actually doesn't need these, because with customer managed key, the disk encryption identity will access, will need all these permissions, not my account. So let me just save it because I don't need it. I will need it in case of Azure disk encryption that we will talk about later. So that part is coming shortly, but let's focus on disk encryption sets now. So let me create a disk encryption set. Okay, I'll choose RG03 as my subscription, give it a name, disk encryption, Central India. It is okay. So region Central India, same as my key. Encryption type is encryption at rest, which is server side with the customer managed key. Yes, I want that. I'm gonna select a key vault. So okay, let's see. This is the key vault I have created for storage encryption. I will select my key and the version. Now here, user assigned identity. Now I need to have an identity in order to make authentication to Azure AD, or the disk will need an identity to make an authentication and authorization. So let's just create a managed identity. So let's search for managed identities. I'm gonna create one. So let me put it in the same resource group, therefore it will be easier to manage. I'm gonna give it a name, encrypt my disks. Okay, let me click on create. Alright, I have a managed identity now. Now it's time to associate that user assigned identity to our disk encryption set. It is automatically coming. Let me add it. Okay, so before I click on review and create, I need to make sure that this account or this identity has the necessary permissions, otherwise it will fail. So let me go to the key vault, Azure encryption, and access policies. Now I will create another access policy, and I want all these managed operations and then cryptographic operations. I will search for my identity for the, okay, it has come. Let's click on next and create. So it is in place. Let me click on refresh. All right, I see that now. Let's click on review and create in the disk encryption set as well. Okay, validation has passed. Let's click on create. Okay, so this has been created. Let's go to the resource. Okay, looks good. Now what I'm gonna do is create a VM, and we will try to encrypt that using Azure storage encryption with customer managed key option. So let me just create it. Okay, let's click RG02. I'll give it a name, uh, Azure storage encryption test. Okay, I don't need a zone right now, just keep it as standard. I'm gonna select a Windows server, or let's say a Windows 10 Pro. Okay, okay, so username and password is done. I confirm I have the rights, and let's click on disks now. Now I don't need a premium SSD, let's keep it a standard HDD. Now key management, right? So this is Azure storage encryption. Okay, now I have options here. Let me select customer managed key. Now if you see, it's already giving me option, like, if I do have a customer managed key, then the option will come. So I have created it, so let's select disk encryption. Okay, now let's click on review and create. I want to keep all as default for now, because I really need to focus on how the encryption goes. So let's click on create. Now if we somehow something went wrong, then we will definitely see an error. Otherwise it should go through. So let's see. Alright, so our machine has been deployed, and the encryption is also enabled. So as you can see, under disks we can see encryption, server side encryption with customer managed key. Okay, next let's see how we can enable Azure disk encryption. So while creating the VM, you might have seen that you did not get a lot of options. However, if you go to, after deploying the machine, if you go to additional settings, you will see options like encryption at host. Right now it's disabled because you need to turn off the machine. Then you can select encryption at host as well. Here, if you scroll down, you will see Azure disk encryption, right? So let me go to another machine that I have, and we will try to enable Azure disk encryption using on that machine. So first of all, let me create another key, and we will try to use that key to enable Azure disk encryption. So let me give it a name, Azure disk encryption key, and create. Now because I'm using Azure disk encryption, I will need some rights on my admin account. So let me edit this. By the way, if you remember, the Azure disk encryption is built into Azure Key Vault, so you might have to remember that. So I'm giving my account encrypt, decrypt, unwrap, wrap, all these permissions along with the basic permissions. So let's click on save. We need to enable one permission for Azure disk encryption itself so that it can access the key vault. So let's go to access configuration, and I'm going to enable this option called Azure disk encryption for volume encryption. Now if I select this, hover over this I button, it says it specifies whether Azure disk encryption is permitted to retrieve secrets from the vault and unwrap keys. So in order to use Azure disk encryption, you need to select this option. So let's click on apply, and it has been updated. Next, what I'm gonna do is go to my another virtual machine ADE test called Azure Disk Encryption Test. It's already running. I'll go to disks and click on this additional settings option. Right now disk to encrypt says none, so I'll select now it gives two options whether I want to encrypt OS disk only or OS and data disk. I do not have a data disk associated to this machine, so I'll select OS disk. Now it's asking me to select a key vault, so I'll say Azure storage encryption. Now it's asking me to select a key. I'll say ADE key, and a version, it's already, I only have one version on it. So let me click on save and see whether I will be able to encrypt this machine. Alright, so the deployment is complete, and if I go to the resource and not the Azure disk, if I go to the my machine, so ADE test, and I go to disks, go to additional settings, I can see that it has enabled the encryption. Here also I see the server-side encryption is enabled with Azure Disk Encryption.